Hello and welcome to Stuff They Should Have Taught You in School. I'm your host Monsui. As always, quick thank you for listening today, and if you are a repeat listener, welcome back. If you're new, then obviously in this podcast we teach you all the things that they should have taught you in school. Also, disclosure, these are done in one take, so there may be a little bit of background noise or this and that happening, or long pauses and things like that. Today's episode is a bit of a rant, and of course it is what have we done to ourselves? What have we actually done? And I'm specifically referring to the housing market in the UK, and exactly what has happened in this housing market that has now led to large rent increases, a drop-off supply, i.e. a lot of the supply has now disappeared, a lot of misunderstanding in this market as well. So let's start, I think, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. What has happened? So first we can understand, anyone can understand, that in any market you have supply and demand, right? So for example, here in the housing market, the supply is obviously houses and the demand is people wanting to live and have a shelter over or have a roof over their head, which is a necessity. So we had Section 24 abolished. We had Section 24 come in, which basically meant that your mortgage interest is not an allowable expense, which means that as any business, in any country, in any business, you can always offset your finance cost against your profit and then pay tax on what's left, right? So now this is changing, and there's no other business in the world where this happens, but it is in property suddenly. So what this means is that we're talking about mortgage interest. We're not talking about the capital. So in any business, you borrowed say 50 grand, and you pay interest on it, say 2.5%, 5% a year, whatever it is. Then that is a tax deductible expense in any business ever. However, now it's changed, which means that you can actually have a loss, but you would still pay tax because the profit is shown to be higher, because your largest cost, which is for properties, the largest cost is mortgages, and the mortgage interest in particular. So if you're an investor or a landlord, you would generally have your property on interest only, which means you only are paying the interest. So your entire monthly mortgage that comes out every month is only the interest on the balance that you owe the bank. So for example, say you had a revenue of £6,000 in the year, your mortgage cost was about £3,000, you spent about £3,000 again refurbing it, putting a new boiler, new flooring in, you paid £400 on insurance, you paid your accountant £300 to do your tax return. So therefore you've got £6,700 worth of expenses and £6,000 worth of income. So there's a loss of £700. But when you're doing this for tax returns, they would actually show you as a £6,000 revenue and £3,700 expenses rather than £6,700. So that means it would show a profit of £2,300 when you've actually made a loss of £700. And if you are the majority of the landlords out there that actually have a daytime job and you only have on average 1 to 2 properties, then you also work. And guess what? That income is taxed after your PAYE job, after your normal job, and that means that for the majority of them, they will be taxed at 40% or 45%. Meaning that your loss of £700 is now, let's get the calculator out because I did most of this in my head. You're now going to pay, say, 40% on you're now going to pay 40% on your accounting, quote unquote, accounting profit of £2,300, and that works out to be £920. So you made a loss of £700 in the year, and now you're going to pay another £900 on top of that on tax, which means to own the property you've lost £1,600 in the year, which is ridiculous. You've also got the Section 21 is being abolished, which means that you actually can't ask for your property back. And the way that the laws are in this country is it's very hard to get your property back if your tenant is not paying. it can be up to 2 years, sometimes more. And all that time, you are expected to meet your mortgage obligations. All that time, you would be expected, like majority of landlords, to look after your family, feed yourself and feed your family, go to work and earn a living from there, then pay your own mortgage and pay, or your own mortgage or your own rent where you live, and then also pay for this person that's not paying the rent in your rented property. And what you're finding as well is that you're finding councils are actually advising tenants to play the game. Councils are actually telling tenants, don't pay your landlord. Manufacture problems, don't give them access. And then when you let them evict you through the court process that takes about 6 months to a year. And I think it's even longer now. It's just absolutely ridiculous. So as a private landlord, naturally, you would want to then mitigate this risk as much as possible. So how would you do this? Well, the easiest way is obviously to exit the market and not have that risk of the government essentially screwing you over, and the government essentially telling your customers that need houses, like everyone does, to say, okay, you know what? You're just special because you can go and earn your money, you can go and buy your Xboxes and your PlayStations, but don't pay your landlord. Pay your utility bills, pay your council tax, and pay every other bill that for your necessities, but don't pay your landlord. And wait 2 years, rack up a debt of 30, 50 grand, and I've seen it time and time again, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of debt racked up. And, it puts the landlords in a situation where they essentially will go bankrupt. They essentially may even go homeless. They may even lose the home that they are actually living in. And their whole entire family may actually go homeless. They may even lose their job from stress or for trying to get this tenant out in their, non-work time. And, obviously the timings of council offices and courts and stuff are 9 to 5. So if you work 9 to 5 and then you're actually trying to get this guy out of there, or this guy or girl out of the house that's not paying you rent, at the same time you are paying the mortgage all the time. At the same time, you're thinking, well, where's the time for me to actually start getting this information together and all of this? You might even take it out of your own day job time. You might even take it as holiday to try and get this stuff done. And what's likely is that you're probably just going to get fired from your job because your employer is going to look at you and be like, why are you taking so much time off? Why are you, doing your own work in work time? Now you've also got third thing. So you had section 24, which is mortgage interest is not allowed. You've got section 21, where you basically can't get your property back. And you've got councils telling people to not pay. Then you've also got rent controls or proposed rent controls. And what people fail to understand, even apparently leading economists, they fail to understand supply and demand. And essentially what this means is if I had a property and I was going to say, okay, I want 10 grand a month for it, the market is going to determine whether I'm going to get that or not. If everywhere else, all of the other houses on the market that have been recently let or have been let in the last year or whatever, or even are on the market at the moment ready to get let, if they're all around £9,000, for example, and I'm asking for £10,000 a month, now this is obviously must be prime location with these figures. I don't know why I use such high figures. But anyway, just in that example, then obviously you're not going to get it. The majority of the cases, it would be asking for like 750 instead of 500. You're not going to rent it. It's like if you could buy a loaf of bread for £1 and Tesco is selling it for, if you could buy a loaf of bread from Tesco, Waitrose, Asda, Costco, everywhere, all of these supermarkets, even the newsagent, you could buy a loaf of bread for £1 or thereabouts, £1, £1.10. And then you go to a new supermarket and they're charging you £5. No one's going to buy it. The market determines what the rent is. Yet you're going to have rent controls and rent freezes. And now you actually look at councils implementing this council by council. However, the real problem is that there's a massive social housing shortage. The councils have got lines of people, lists of people, tens of thousands, likely hundreds of thousands plus of people that need a home. Yet they're more concerned about freezing rents that don't even need to be frozen because the market determines. There is a crisis, there is a housing shortage in this country, and we need more properties. We don't need to bash landlords over the head more. We need to work with landlords and with tenants to try and make a solution that works for everyone. There's a lot of land in this country as well, and a lot of derelict houses that need to be refurbed and put into, good homes for people that can, that can live there for 10, 20 years, start their family, start their life, or even continue, their life and whatever. Then we've also got fourth thing, EPC ratings. So EPC, Energy Performance Certificate. Basically, it's a rating on how energy efficient your home is. So it will look at your heating controls, it will look at if you've got double glazed windows, what the wall insulation is like. So I do want to get one thing clear, is I do obviously agree with more energy efficient homes. But now we're going to ask the landlords to increase it to a basic, so the A is the highest. They're going to ask everyone to increase it to a C, and F or G is the lowest. This means that essentially, if this law is passed, that overnight a large proportion of homes will become unrentable. And if you're looking at tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people need a home, and there's a housing shortage, and then we're going to say, okay, most of these, maybe even, maybe not half, maybe not most, but a significant proportion of these are now overnight not going to be able to be rented. Then what's going to happen? Supplies dropped even further, and rents are going to go up even more. Tenants are going to get screwed even more. And that means, so even 4 to 5 million people rent in this country. And even if it's 1% of those homes that now cannot be rented, that's 40,000 homes. That's 40,000 families that cannot be. That's an entire town that can't be used. We can't do anything with it. We can't rent it out to other people. Generally, obviously, if you're renting a place, you probably own your own house, or you're living in a different house. So what are you going to do with this house? You're just going to use it as a holiday home or something. There's no proper action plan as to how this can be achieved. And most houses were built for a time before we even realised this. So then now to ask landlords to say, okay, put in tens of thousands of pounds, even though your tenant's not paying, even though that you've been slated, even though that everyone hates you incorrectly from incorrect and inaccurate. So let's go on to this. What actually happened to the social housing / affordable housing market? So this is I've said social housing a couple of times, but this is where the council essentially pays your rent. The council houses you and gives you a place to live. So in the year 2000, 20%, 1/5 of renters were in social homes or affordable housing. Now it's gone down slightly to 16-17%. But the government model was so before councils owned the houses, and then they gave the tenants the house, but now they decided to get rid of it, and they decided to put them all into private rented sector. And then they decided, okay, we're going to give them a housing benefit or housing allowance that then will go to the landlord, the private landlord. And instead of putting taxpayers' money towards getting these houses up to standard and maintaining them, which is obviously necessary, they now expect a private landlord to do this. And what has happened is that they've basically made a blame game for the private landlord, and they basically said the housing crisis is equal to private landlords, even though the social housing sector and the council housing sector have cut their supply out completely, and then said to the landlords, private landlords, you take them on. Now we're getting blamed. And now you see in headlines, and the general consensus is, if you are in the UK and you go to the pub and you ask someone, what do you think about landlords? They're going to say they're greedy, they're, all these swear words, all these hate words towards them, whereas the facts show otherwise. You've bashed landlords, the council and the government have bashed landlords as a scapegoat when they're really not to blame. And, the councils, they've just bashed landlords for a long time now. They're not picking up the slack for the social housing. There's this, like I said, the waiting list is probably hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands per council. So if you imagine over however many councils there are, probably 100, 136 or something, I think. And there's hundreds of thousands of people that are on waiting lists. Now they've got incentives to say, okay, to a landlord, you know what, take on a council tenant and we'll give you 10 years rent up front. We'll give you £1,000 cash just so that you can take them on. But, now these are good incentives, yeah, but if the tenant declares the wrong thing, even by mistake, the council won't pay. I heard one example where a council overpaid on a previous property, on a previous private landlord, and then it came to this person. And what the council said is that because we overpaid on the previous one, we're going to now take the money from you, even though they're clearly unrelated. So you can say, landlords, on one hand, you might say, landlords don't actually want council housing, but that is incorrect. We actually do, but the reason why we don't want them, we like council tenants, we do, because it can be very secure. They can't lose their job, they can't lose their income stream because it's the council. You've got long-term tenants that are there for 10, 20 years. It's a no-brainer until you realise that it's paid so badly that your income, your private landlord income, and your food on the table for you and your kids is down to someone else that would essentially give in one hand and slate the fuck out of you on the other hand, and make sure that you're actively hated by the masses. And then what you find is that you find tenants hate landlords, most of them do, and what they'll do is they'll sit in your property and they'll cause malicious damage and they won't pay. And then, like I said with the laws that have passed, you won't be able to get them out and you're screwed. You'll go bankrupt, you'll lose your own home, you'll lose the rented home, and you and your family will essentially be living on the streets. You'll lose your job as well. Because as we know, if you're really, really stressed at home, if you're really stressed at work, you'll take it out at home. If you're really stressed at home, you'll take it out at work. And it goes around. If you're really, really stressed and you're really struggling in one area of your life, it will affect the other areas of your life. Another example. A tenant actually showed a landlord a card that was delivered through their letterbox from the council. On one side it said that universal credit is changing, so universal credit is how they're paid. On the other side it said how to calculate your income and expenditures. It said all your money is put into one package, and this is your income from the council. The first thing you must pay is council tax. Isn't that funny? The second thing is utilities. The third thing is for food and clothing. And what is left will go to the landlord. And you must negotiate with the landlord to reduce your rent. Then, of course, they will advise them not to pay, manufacture problems, and not allow the landlord access, which the landlord can go to jail for if the house is not maintained, because this is obviously a safety issue. But if the tenant's not actually letting you come into the property, you're still to be blamed. And if the council is telling the tenant, don't let them into the property, make sure that there are problems in the property, make sure you're causing more damp by not opening windows and keeping the heating on full, make sure that you make sure that this place isn't really dirty and unhygienic. But don't let the landlord do anything, and don't pay the landlord, and basically screw them over. Then even further, there's a massive argument about owning your own home, and this is induced by the media, and they're saying, no one can own their own home. But the reality of the facts are that 65% of homes in the UK, 65% are unencumbered, which means people own their homes outright with no mortgage. Landlords are hated by the general public. People have been told incorrect and inaccurate information. And it reminds me of what happened after the Second World War. When, after the Second World War, and you probably don't know this because we're not taught this in school. Well, if you're brown or black, you might know it. But for the most people, they don't. That after the Second World War, Indians and Africans were asked by the British government to come to the UK and rebuild the country. They were asked to come, so they came in masses. But what they failed to do is tell the British public that this is what we've asked them to do. And then what did we get? We got so much racism. I hear stories, true stories from my parents and grandparents where, for example, my dad was 10 years old he was 8 years old and his brother was 10. They came outside a swimming pool. They had a swim and they came out. I hear stories of 6, 7 skinheads pushing these two 8-year-old and 10 years to a side with baseball bats, beat the shit out of their dad, my granddad. And in fact, when I was cutting his hair one day, I'm not a hairdresser, but he asked me to. I was cutting his hair one day. I could actually see how misshapen his skull was. They broke his nose, they beat the shit out of him, he's on the floor bleeding. These two kids are asking other people in the public for help, but no one wants to help because they're fucking brown. The government have asked people to come to the country and help rebuild, and then we're just hit with a masses of racism, where you've literally got people, adults, pushing kids to a side and beating the shit out of their own family. And that reminds me of what happened during slavery. And now we're getting really, really down deep into this. And now you're really seeing what the government is really like, where they will take from one hand and slate you from the other hand. And they will... And, this is what it happens, They called the ambulance, no one came. They called the police, no one came. What they had to do is they had to go back into the swimming pool, and then finally they were treated with first aid from inside the swimming pool. And, you can go back throughout history and you can see where you've had ethnic cleansing. You can see where you've had people throwing babies up into the air and hitting them with bayonets. You can see where people have been killed in front of their family, raped in front of their family. Sons raped in front of their mothers, mothers raped in front of their sons. People, with sticks shoved up their arse until they die. And all sorts of things like this, which are absolutely terrible. And it just reminds me, this entire situation just reminds me of all of this, of how on one hand you can say one piece of information to some people, and then on the other hand you're basically creating hate towards those people that you have manufactured, the council. And if there's anyone from the council listening and anyone from the government listening, you know exactly what you've done, and it's a mess. You should have taught these people why the brown and black people are coming. You should have taught people why Africa is so poor right now. Many countries in Africa are so poor right now. Why we actually have third world countries, because the wealth was stripped previously. So anyway, back to landlords. So now what you're seeing is, of course, landlords are exiting the market, and the government haven't even shot themselves in the foot. They've actually shot everyone in the foot. They've just shot everyone that rents. Like me personally, I would actually rent where I live. I would rather rent it. I wouldn't want to own it. Now you're seeing landlords exit the market. Over 20%. 1/5 of landlords are exiting the market. And if we said that 4 to 5 million, you're saying 1 million houses are exiting the market. Tenants are just having a really hard time now finding a place, because there's no supply. There's a huge the demand is the same, but the supply is basically just shrunk. I mean, why would you want to supply a necessary thing to people, and then everyone hates you for it? Even though that you're not being greedy or anything, you're just charging market rent, whatever the market is telling you to charge. Like I said, I can't charge £1,500 a month in a place where the market is charging £1,000. I couldn't even charge $1,550 in a place where the people are. I couldn't even charge $1,550 in a place where people are asking for $1,500. You can't even do £50 above market value, because people won't rent. You have to drop the rent. I've actually had tenants. I had one tenant give me notice and then withdraw the notice because he couldn't find anywhere else. Because you can't. They're getting snapped up so quickly. And people that are like proper on it, they'll pay 6 months up front, 3 months up front. They'll grab the property immediately. They'll say, even though we can't move in now, we're going to pay you. It's crazy. Landlords now have the pick of tenants, because all this rules and stuff means that the supply has disappeared. The demand's still there. Tenants have less choice. Prices go up. I'm sure that the economists that were consulted during before we put all of these measures in place. Now let's recap them. Section 24, your finance cost is not allowed. Section 21, you can't ask for your property back. Rent controls are here or they're proposed. You are expecting people to increase a large proportion of houses to a certain energy performance, which is unrealistic. There's no proper plan in place. Social housing has disappeared, and we're trying to get landlords to take the slack from that. Councils won't pay properly. Councils have bashed landlords. Government has bashed landlords. The medias have bashed landlords over the head with a massive hammer. People just don't know the facts. Like I said, 65% of homes are owned outright with no mortgage. Landlords are hated by the general public from incorrect and inaccurate information, just like brown people were hated by the general public from incorrect and inaccurate information. So all of that, obviously landlords are now going to exit, as you can see has happened. And leading economists, surely you can understand supply and demand. Surely you can understand if you restrict supply, demand is the same, prices will go up. And who suffers? Well, it's the quote-unquote poor or quote-unquote less wealthy, people who rent, who people generally would associate, even though that is not necessarily true. Like I said, me personally, even though I could go and own my own home, I wouldn't want to do that. I would rather rent it. Now we're saying rent freezes and, rent controls is one thing, rent freezes is a different thing. But why, and with this hyperinflation, all this stuff, we're saying, okay, let's freeze rents. But why don't we freeze prices of other things? Why doesn't Tesco freezing the price of essential goods and services as well? Now, at one point we've now discussed, and this is turning into quite a long episode. We've now discussed how the market has basically is changing due to what the government and councils have done, and how this information has been spread to the public, or the information hasn't been spread to the public as to why this is happening. So, we got to go back. We got to rewind a little bit further before all of this started happening, because we got to understand that this is a market, and you got supply and you got demand, and we need both. At one point, it was unfair to tenants. At one point in time, it was unfair to it was completely unfair. And what happened is that if a tenant didn't pay at one point, you could go there, bag up all their stuff, chuck it outside and change the locks, and essentially make them homeless. Now, this is clearly not right. But then again, it's clearly not right for now. It's gone the complete other way. It's clearly not right for a tenant not to pay for 2 years plus, and you not to be able to get them out of the property or chase them for the money. We need landlords. We need tenants. We need both of them. It's like what you're seeing is essentially like saying, let's kill night, but we want to keep day. They're part of the same system. We need both. The law should be fair for both people. We need to have proper measures in place that make sure that houses are safe. We need to have proper measures in place to show that there's enough houses for everyone, which means if there is enough houses, then prices will come down. We also need to have proper measures in place that if the tenants that don't pay, or the tenants that are generally not good tenants, they can be removed or put, there has to be some solution to what we can do with those, and faster rather than late, a quick solution rather than waiting for landlords to basically ruin their entire life, or tenants to ruin the landlord's life. And we need both. Like I said, at one point it was favoured towards landlords. Now it's favoured towards tenants. And when you see it that way, when you're seeing the demand that it's favoured towards tenants, the supply exits the market, as you've seen. So what have we done? What have we done to ourselves? Or what has the council and governments done? Why have they done this? I've got no clue. All I do know is that the people who are renting are getting the brunt of the force. They're going to get hit the hardest. And that's exactly what you've seen. Rents have gone up so much. Forget inflation and all that. They were going up anyway. Well, rents actually do, over time, over the last 100 years or so, have increased with inflation, as you would expect. Anyway, that's the end of that rant. Maybe you enjoyed it, maybe you didn't. Maybe it opened your eyes, maybe you already knew this. Drop me an email, monsu@icloud.com, with any feedback and things like that. Any topic requests, even just to say hi. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned something today and found maybe some value out of it as well. And I hope to see you on the next episode.